Hello everyone, this is Oliver G here from the Eiffel Tower, and there is nothing worse than a long podcast introduction. So with that in mind, this is chapter 3 of my 2020 memoir, Paris on Air. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll be back at the end with a little more info. Let's do it. Chapter 3. The French countryside, difficult bankers, and a blowout birthday party in a castle. 3.1. Birthday plans.
Hey, you should hire a castle for your 30th birthday. You can totally get them cheap in the French countryside,
said Shelley, an American friend in Paris. Even though I'd spent over a year in Paris at this point, these kind of sentences still sounded odd to me. I suppose it was something to do with my upbringing in Australia, where we don't have things like old castles in the countryside. We don't have any old buildings at all, really. Not like in Europe. In fact, the oldest thing in my Australian hometown was the lady next door. I wonder whatever happened to her.
Oliver, Ollie, wake up,
said Shelley, snapping me back into the room.
It's simple. You just type chateau into Airbnb and set it to France. If everyone chipped in, you could get something amazing for a full weekend.
Several months had passed since the attacks, and people were looking for distractions. The trauma had brought many people closer together, including my own group of friends. None of us had shown any signs of wanting to leave Paris. Myself, I'd signed to extend the lease on my apartment for another year. But everyone wanted something to look forward to, and a weekend at a chateau seemed like the right kind of idea. In fact, renting a chateau in the French countryside was exactly the kind of outrageous thing you should do when you turn 30 in Paris. I agreed. So I opened up the Airbnb app and did as she said. It turned out there were over 200 properties for rent in France listed as castles. They were spread all over the country, some tucked among the other luxury homes on the Riviera, others nestled in the hillsides of Brittany, and some only a short drive from Paris. These chateaux ranged from as little as €107 to €8,600 per night. So, our challenge was to find one that wouldn't break the bank for anyone, yet would still be grand enough to make for an impressive birthday weekend. I settled on the Château d'Autricourt, which was somewhere in the Champagne region, about 250 kilometers to the east of Paris. We scrolled through the pictures online. Chandeliers, 4-poster beds, and enough space for 40 guests. But what really sold it for us was the poetic and enigmatic description on the chateau's website. It spoke of nude nymphs at the nearby stream, a moat filled with enormous carp, an ancient kitchen, ghost hunting, and succulent snail tasting. Built on the 11th century foundations, but mostly in a Renaissance style, 15 bedrooms, 3 salons, a vaulted dining room, and a medieval kitchen are surrounded by 25 hectares of cow meadows, gamey woods, and fish-filled rivers. The decor of your dreams awaits you in this magical atmosphere. While my birthday wasn't for months to come, I emailed the owners and reserved the chateau. This would be a birthday to remember. And why shouldn't we party like it's $15.99? .2 The Basketballers. Playing basketball in Paris opened more doors for me than pretty much anything else. I've played since I was a boy, so I'm no slouch on the court. And what's more, while my height made showering at home a nightmare, it was pretty damn helpful on the court. Just being tall meant that I'd often be the first pick for a team, even if no one had seen me play. I shot hoops every weekend when the weather allowed it, and I soon became a familiar face on the outdoor court in the Marais. But not everyone warmed to me, and I suspect this was because of a particularly embarrassing language blunder. But first, a bit of context about the Paris basketball community, which is unlike others I've seen around the world. For starters, many of the French players want to seem tough and cool. They love the American basketball style and often wear the jerseys of current players, the newest sneakers, and they play American rap music from portable speakers attached to their phones. When a player arrives at the court, he'll walk the length of the magnificent Philippe Auguste wall and he will check every other player, even if they've not met before. By check, I mean he'll give a casual but strong high five, followed by a fist bump, almost like gently punching each other in the fist. And I have no problem with that at all. I think it's pretty cool, actually. Certainly a lot cooler than the guys I played with in Sweden, who'd give each other a hug before the game like it was some kind of yoga retreat. The French guys love to use slang with each other too, which fits in pretty nicely with a fist-bumping tough guy attitude. When I first came across verlan, the infamous backwards slang, I almost tripped over my own shoes. I'd sunk a long shot, and a guy came up to me, bumped my fist, and said what sounded like bien wedge. I suppose no one really knows how to spell it, because it's not really a word. At least, it definitely wasn't a word I'd heard before. My teammate, sensing my confusion, told me it was verlan, or backwards slang for bien joué, well played. So, instead of saying bien joué, he switched the joué around and made it sound a bit more like wedge. Get it? Jouer becomes ouège, ouège, wedge. Are you confused? Well, so was I, and all I was trying to do was play basketball. All verlan words are made by switching the syllables around in words. An easier example is how the word for thank you, merci, becomes si mer. People actually say that, and while this might sound like some kind of secret code for children, French people use it a lot, provided they're under the age of 40. Me, I was floundering in the language, but always listening and always learning from these Parisian hoopers. The guys also had a wide variety of ways to address each other, and never by name. Where in America you might say dude, or where Australians say mate, the French have seemingly endless options. Some of them are mec, as I've mentioned before, and which is probably the most common, gar, short for garçon or boy, grand, as in big, pot, poto, and bro, which they took from the English bro, bro. They also love to add the word mon, meaning my, at the beginning, similar to how some Americans will call each other my man, or I suppose how Brits might say my good man. In any case, you can add the mon in front of almost all of the slang words I just used, except for one, which I learned the hard way. So, while there's no problem with saying mon grand, mon pote, or mon gars, and they say all of these things on repeat, you can absolutely not say mon mec, which actually means my love, or my darling, more or less. I had no idea, of course, and trying to fit in, I would walk the length of the wall and high-five all of the guys while saying the French version of hello, my love, to each of them. They maybe looked at me strangely, but that was nothing new. The weirdest thing is no one ever corrected me. Not until much, much later when I emailed a French friend and began the email with salut mon mec. He responded that I should never utter the phrase again unless I either had a boyfriend or wanted to start a fight. At that point, I'd been saying mon mec for months. Maybe the guys were all too cool to help a struggling foreigner with his blunders. Maybe they didn't care. Or maybe they thought I was gay. Who knows? Anyway, some of my little darlings on the court became good friends. I'd heard them talking of an almost mythical indoor league in the Marais, and I was itching for an invite. I say mythical because the buildings in central Paris are so narrow that the idea of playing basketball inside one of them seemed impossible. But when my invite finally arrived, basketball became an even more magical experience. The courts were housed inside a stone building called the Halles des Blancs-Manteaux, which was over 200 years old and used to be the local covered market. I found an illustration of the building from around 1820, and it's hardly changed. The hall has kept its grand archway entrance, and the roof is still supported by enormous stone pillars, which are now separating the two courts. On summer nights, we'd be blinded by the sunlight coming in through windows that seemed worthy of a cathedral. Spots in the league were hard to get, but once you were in for life. The games were every Tuesday night, and I played there for years. Often, I'd go out for a drink or two with some of the guys afterwards, particularly two of them who were from Normandy. They introduced me to Ricard, a drink made from aniseed that's mixed with water and washes down easily after a few hours of basketball. They take great pride in this little ritual, using tongs to put the ice in tall tumblers, pouring their Ricard over the top, then adding just the right amount of water so that it wasn't spoiled. They also led me through the minefields of French slang and other language mishaps. Often we'd end up in hysterics discussing our worst mistakes hours into the night. One told me he'd left his English-speaking colleagues in tears after saying pet sleeve instead of pet peeve. Another told me that he never used the English word focus because he couldn't, for the life of him, make it sound like anything besides fuck us. One time I was giving a presentation in English to some Americans and I really needed them to pay attention. I said to them, listen, I need you to fuck us. You need to fuck us really hard. Fuck us, he said to us, and we roared with laughter. But at least I got their attention in the end. People have often asked me for tips for integrating into Paris, and especially meeting French people, and I always suggest a group activity like sport. Even better if it's the kind of activity that can end in drinks afterwards to loosen the tongue and hide the shame of the eternal language struggle. Without basketball, I sometimes wonder how many Parisians I'd actually know. Chapter 3.3, Brittany with Fabien.
Yes.
That voice you just heard is the voice of Fabien. He's got his name in the title of the chapter. He's in the studio with me. Welcome.
Welcome, Oliver.
This is your first time on the show?
First time.
We've done some videos and stuff together.
Yes, a lot.
So some people may have met Fabien, but he's here in the studio for me. Interestingly, he hasn't read this chapter at all.
No.
You've been a little bit worried about it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. But I think you're going to like it. We'll see how it goes. I'm interested to see your reflections on it. Yeah. And you'll hang around at the end for a little chat?
Sure.
Perfect. Okay, let's go. 3.3, Brittany with Fabien. Am I pronouncing it right? Fabien?
Fabien, yeah.
Fabien. Okay, here we go. If you want to learn French in Paris, don't hang out with expats. This was a lesson I'd come to learn from Fabien. I say Fabien, to be fair.
Yeah, whatever. All right.
A sailor from Brittany. Well, he wasn't a sailor, but he had been in the Navy, and Fabien the Breton sailor had a ring to it. Fabien, with his penchant, or penchant, for hats and thick beard, was as French as you could get. But after a decade in London, he decided he preferred to hang out with English-speaking expats in Paris. One day we were having a canal-side drink, and I was talking about my lack of exposure to the French language and the real France.
Mate, why don't you come out to Brittany? Come and stay with my family for the weekend. I'll give you a real taste of the French language, France, and most importantly, Brittany.
I'd heard about Breton pride. A survey once found that people from Brittany were more likely to consider themselves Bretons first, French second. Really? I'd love to come to Brittany, I responded. I've heard great things about the whole region. Fabien's eyes filled with pride. It's happening right now. There's no quicker way to...
She's crying right now.
There's no quicker way to a Breton's heart than to praise his region or his cider. Fabien excitedly pulled out his phone and scrolled through his calendar. This was no empty gesture. This was a plan. By the end of the evening, we'd booked 3 train tickets from Paris to the French countryside. Lena was coming too.
You won't regret this, mate. There's nowhere in the world like Brittany.
Should we order a cider to celebrate?
Nah, don't drink the cat piss cider in Paris. If it's not Breton cider, then it's not worth drinking. You will soon know the difference.
On the day of the big trip, France was in the middle of a fairly typical summer rail strike. Rail workers weren't happy with something or other. You recognize that, huh? And most of the trains were cancelled, including our train to Rennes, the capital of Brittany. I was covering the strike for the news site during the day, and I texted Fabien to let him know about the cancellation.
Don't worry, mate. We'll find a way. Meet at the station as planned. See you at 6.
We all met at Gare Montparnasse, a train station on the left bank. A little-known fact outside of France is that all the main train stations in Paris serve specific areas. Trains from Gare du Nord head to the north.
No.
Gare de l'Est serves the east.
Est.
And trains from Gare de Lyon go to...
Lyon.
You guessed it. And its surroundings, of course. Gare Montparnasse, which was called Gare de l'Ouest when it opened.
I didn't know that.
Really? You should read the book, mate. Come on. Serves Brittany and the west of France. And the whole area around the station has a strong Breton influence.
Yeah.
The best galettes in town can be found. The best galettes in town can be found at the stands and restaurants dotted around the station. If you want cider, that's where you should head.
But no, you should head to Brittany. Get on the train.
We're going to get on the train. But all this I learned much later. I was just focusing on getting to the station in time. When we arrived, the departures board made it crystal clear. Almost all of the trains were cancelled. But a fascinating thing happens when you travel with a Frenchman. You learn how to play the system. Fabian approached the ticket seller, who was clearly exhausted and irritated after spending his day dealing with irate customers. Fabian talked to him politely and calmly.
On a des tickets pour le train de 18h30. Je vois qu'il est annulé.
Fabian, you got to do it in English for the listeners.
Okay.
It's an English audio experience.
All right. We've booked tickets for the 6:30 train to Rennes, which I see is cancelled. Now there is another train that's going to Rennes at 7 p.m.
And now I'll do the voice of the ticket guy, okay? Yes, monsieur, but it's fully booked. Not only that, everyone at this station wants to get on that train because they all want to get to Brittany this weekend.
I understand, but I wanted to know which platform the train will leave from.
The ticket seller looks suspiciously at Fabian and his two tourist friends. It's platform 4, but it shouldn't serve you any purpose to know it. You don't have a ticket for that train, monsieur. Why would you be getting on it?
But of course. Merci beaucoup.
Fabian smiled and left.
Okay, let's go to platform 4.
Fabian told us with a smile. That was exactly how you said it.
We are getting on that train.
We headed to the platform in the main hall where scores of Bretons were spread out widely, all with their eyes on the departure board. Fabian did the same thing, but from the safety of the entrance to platform 4. What's going on? I asked.
Everyone in this crowd wants to get on that train, but there's not enough room for us all. It's first come, first served. As soon as that sign's revealed which platform the train will leave from, it will be blind panic as everyone rushes to the platform. But we know which platform it is. The man told us.
Even though we were apparently at the right platform, Fabian kept his eyes on the departure board just like everyone else. Me? I observed the crowd. Would-be travelers, tired Bretons, all desperate to get on that one train for Brittany. And suddenly, a ripple of panic hit the crowd. The departure board had clicked over and prompted a stampede. Bretons were scrambling over each other, elbowing their way forward and barging towards the platform. And they were all running towards us. I looked up at the board. Rennes, Brittany, platform 4. Fabian smiled. We were at the front of the crowd and we got on the train as soon as the doors opened. Sure, we didn't have tickets, but neither did most of the others. We headed for the bar, as all the actual seats were taken by those lucky enough to have booked the 7 p.m. train. The rest of us who managed to get on board filled up in the bar and the spaces between the carriages. The Bretons remaining on the platform weren't so lucky and were eventually refused permission to board.
These rare strikes are an embarrassment.
Fabian admitted as the train pulled away from the station.
But there is one piece of good news. Because our train was cancelled, I'll be claiming a refund for us all. This is a free trip to Brittany. And what's more, we are already in a bar.
If I'd been traveling alone, I probably wouldn't have even tried to get on the train. I'd have been on a bus or staying home for the weekend. Who'd have thought traveling with a Frenchman could open such doors? And I soon learned that there's no better way to see Brittany than with a Breton. Fabian's family lived in a village near Saint-Brieuc, the small town where he grew up. The town isn't famous for anything unless you're a big fan of the annual Tour de France cycling race, which sometimes passes through. But from the moment we stepped into Fabian's house, I was hit by the feeling of actually being in France for the first time. Sure, walking down the cobbled streets of Montmartre or sitting on a café terrace on the left bank of Paris both felt very French, but Paris isn't France, and France isn't Paris, as anyone from either side would be quick to tell you. Fabian's mother welcomed us, as their pet dogs jumped at our legs, and his mother, as a rule, decided she wouldn't speak a word of English with us, even though she probably could have done. Could she, by the way?
I think she can.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So here's a line for her. Do you want to do it? You can do her accent as well.
There is no better way to learn French than to immerse yourself. That's rubbish. Let's start again. Le meilleur moyen de parler français, c'est de vraiment s'immerger dans la langue française.
I don't understand why you keep doing it in French.
I thought
you got to read the English bits.
I thought you asked me to speak French. You just told me.
Okay. And translate it?
No, there's no better way to learn French than to immerse yourself.
Fabian's family served us hot galette pancakes with cheese and sausage. Typical Breton food. We drank locally made cider and we talked... Do you remember this?
So good.
We talked long into the night about the differences between France, Australia, and Sweden. As the night drew to an end, part of me was sad to realize that I couldn't understand France the way that I would if I had French in-laws, like so many other expats did. I didn't have a family out in the French countryside who'd point out the idiosyncrasies of the French, the tricks to the best recipes, or the meaning of certain gesticulations. The thing is, it's exceptionally difficult to figure out a country when you don't have close access to one of its families. French friends are great and they can teach you a lot, but it's not the same thing. As I observed the Brittany skies from Fabien's childhood bedroom, I was beginning to realize that I might never understand France and the French without such an opportunity. Luckily, way down the line, I'd start a podcast all about figuring out France, a podcast that would teach me and hundreds of thousands of listeners about this fascinating country. But at this point, I was still just a humble journalist trying to find my way. My mind drifted as I breathed fresh country air and the stars came out in the Brittany sky. Chapter 3.4, The Countryside, and Fabien is still in the studio with me.
Yes.
We woke up the next morning to a full French breakfast. The table was laid out with fresh bread, homemade jam, and plenty of pastries.
Heat up,
Said Fabien's mother. You said heat up then.
Heat up.
I'm glad you said that because earlier in the chapter I mentioned that French sometimes add H's.
Yes.
Yes, that's true. But mostly Stefan. There's another bit from Fabien's mother.
There's plenty left, and we've got a lot to do today.
We spent the day exploring the coastal towns of Brittany, including the magnificent fortified Saint-Malo.
Yeah.
Nods from Fabien there.
Mm-hmm.
On the way home, we came to an unusually named town. Can you pronounce it?
Erquy.
Erquy. So for you guys at home, it's E-R-Q-U-Y. Erquy. It was a small and quiet place perched by the seaside and dotted with cafes, bars, and restaurants.
This town should be famous.
Fabien said, shaking his head as we sat down for another cider.
Have you heard of Asterix, the comic?
Yeah.
Well, take a look around. You are in the comic book.
Wait, in the comic book?
Yeah. This is the town that is said to have inspired it all. But you'd never know.
He was right. After the cider, we took a look around, but there wasn't even a vague hint that it was connected to one of the world's most famous comic books. Not even a gift shop with little Asterix toys or postcards. I couldn't believe it. Not least because the French are obsessed with comic books, or bande dessinée.
Bande dessinée.
Bande dessinée, as they're known here. But Erquy didn't seem to care. In some countries, they'd rename such a place Asterix Town and watch the tourist fly in. There'd be Obelix ice cream and magic potion cocktails. But in Erquy, there was nothing.
The funniest thing,
Fabien said,
is that someone once made an enormous stone statue of Obelix. You know, the big one who fell in a magic potion as a baby. And they offered it to the town as a gift, but the town refused it. They didn't want it. And I've got no idea why.
Fabien gazed out to the sea, perhaps reflecting on his days in the Navy. Simpler times, without the mainland hassles of Paris, the fickle Erquy residents, the rail strikes. So what happened to the giant statue? I asked.
My stepdad took it. It's sitting in the back garden of his bed and breakfast in a nearby town. It makes no sense that it's there, but my stepdad quite likes it.
And so it was, as we saw later in the afternoon, a mammoth stone statue of Obelix. The kind of thing that could have stood proudly in a park in the middle of Erquy, but it was in the middle of a garden in the middle of nowhere, without even an explanation. The weekend was drawing to a close, so we headed back to Fabien's village to get a good night's sleep before taking the early train to Paris. Of course, that train was cancelled too.
Of course.
The strikes were apparently still on, so we hopped on board another and rode in the bar carriage once again. As the Brittany countryside rushed by the bar window, I got to thinking about the region, the local pride, and the Obelix statue. The French are a proud bunch, and none are prouder than those outside of Paris. But while they'll bleed in the colours of their flag, they're not going to force anything on you. Maybe they don't want our tourist dollars. Maybe they don't all want statues of Obelix and postcards of Asterix. It seemed to me that people in the countryside were quite happy to leave the tourists to Paris and Disney World. Sure, my first trip to the real France was only a weekend, but I felt like I was coming back to Paris with a deeper understanding of the country. No, France isn't Paris, and Paris isn't France. And everyone in the country seems pretty happy to keep it like that.
Very good.
You like that?
Yeah.
Bit of a laugh with that Navy line in there. So let's talk about it, if you don't mind hanging around. So is that how you remembered it? This is a couple of years ago now.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Oh, it's quite a few years.
Yeah.
It was a very good weekend. I mean, the strike made it even more like a journey.
Do you think? I mean, is that something you have to deal with a lot going out to the Brittany?
The strikes?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of French culture, really.
Yeah. And unfortunately. What did your mum think of us?
She loved you guys.
Yeah.
She's always asking for you.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, we should go back out there again.
Yeah.
Recreate the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about the obelisk statue?
Still there.
Yeah.
And still no one knows about it.
My last question for you. This whole idea of people in Brittany being very proud.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the same everywhere, or do you think it's especially true in Brittany?
I think there is a few regions in France who have very strong cultures, especially like Brittany is one of them, Corsica is one of them, because I think Brittany having their own language, food, it used to be independent, like centuries ago. So I think there's a very strong culture and proud of being from Brittany.
And if you had to tell people, we can finish on this, if you had to give people one tip of one place to visit in Brittany, where would it be?
I would say Cap Fréhel.
Which one?
Cap Fréhel.
Is that where we went?
Yeah, we went there. Do you remember this big lighthouse? It was very windy.
Like Plumenac?
No. I think we went to Cap Fréhel on the way back from Saint-Malo.
The island with the microclimate.
No, that's Bréa. Oh, Bréa could be the one, yeah.
we went
to Bréa.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah. It was nice.
And I remember clearly Bréa because that's the time where you realize you didn't fill your taxes.
That's probably a story later in this. It's true. When we were on holiday, it was the same trip. We were on that holiday, and I think that comes back in the book. When I had tax problems and need to go into the tax office.
But Bréa is the one, yeah. Ile de Bréa is amazing.
But anyway, you're back later on in this chapter 3.
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk to you then.
Okay. See you in a bit.
We'll be in the chateau. I'll see you then, Fabien.
Bye.
3.5 French Kissing. As I pulled into Lyon on a warm summer afternoon, Chantal waved to me from the window of her second-floor apartment. She buzzed me into her building. I climbed the stairs, and she flung open the door to greet me. And then we kissed, right on the lips. Now, while this might sound like a romantic start to chapter 3.5, I'm afraid you're getting it all wrong, just like I was. You see, I'd never met Chantal before. I'd never even seen her. Chantal was nothing more than the owner of the apartment I was renting for the weekend. So why were we kissing on the lips? Well, I wanted the same thing, and Lena, who was standing beside me, wasn't looking too impressed. "Oh là là, I'm so sorry," Chantal said, blushing. "But I see what has happened. It's la bise. It's different here. In Lyon, we start the greeting kisses on the right-hand side. You should move your own head right, then left, not left then right like in Paris." So what had happened was that as I moved my head to the left to kiss the air by Chantal's right cheek, as they do in Paris, she moved her head to the right to kiss my left cheek. And as a result, our air kiss greeting turned into a good old-fashioned mouth-to-mouth smooch. This was all a bit unfair, if you ask me. I'd spent a long time in Paris accepting and eventually getting comfortable with the air kissing custom. But I'd never considered it could be a whole different dance across France. And while my first visit to Lyon was lovely, it was the cheek kissing that stayed with me. The very concept that such a fundamental French custom could be reversed in different towns fascinated me. In fact, the whole matter of cheek kissing seemed to get more complicated the closer I looked into it. And let me just say, if you think it all sounds pretty simple, then you either don't understand it or you're a genius. Here's my take on how it works. The basic idea is that when you meet someone of the opposite sex in France, you touch cheeks with them and make a kissing noise in the air. Then repeat this for the other cheek. Easy enough, right? Wrong. Here are the exceptions to the rule. 1. If they're from outside Paris, they may kiss more or fewer times. 2. Non-Parisians may start on the right instead of the left. 3. Tourists and expats might be uncomfortable with kissing. Now, if he's a man and you're a man, you need to earn the kiss. Now, there are a few ways you can attain kissing status with another Frenchman. 4A. You're a relative close to the Frenchman. Brother, father, son, or cousin. 4B. You get to know them closely or have married into their family. I'm rather captivated by the topic. And if you think I'm exaggerating the complexity of la bise, well, let me tell you that if anything, I'm underplaying it. Just take point 1 for an example and think about it. If you're from Paris, you kiss twice, left and right. If you're from the south of France, then you kiss 3 times. Now, what happens when a Parisian and a Provençal meet on a holiday in the west of France, where you're allegedly supposed to kiss 4 times? Is there an air kiss where someone goes in for the 3rd while the other's retreating to start some small talk? Or do they just know, because that's how it is? Point 2 is intriguing too, the whole which side to start on thing. I'll never forget my awkward smooch with Chantal, but I also wonder how many times that happens among French people. Point 3, the whole expat thing, that can ruin a lot too. You're at a party with a mix of French people and expats, and you go around the room kissing the girls and shaking hands with the boys. You're meeting them for the first time, so you have no idea where they're from. You come to a Swedish woman. Well, there's every chance that, as you lean in for the kiss, she'll offer you a hand to shake. Gender equality above all else, remember? She might even go for the more traditional Swedish hug as a force of habit. And if everyone doesn't play along with the kissing game, someone is bound to look stupid. I have a friend, Cyril, who's from Nice on the Mediterranean coast. We're on kissing terms now, although of course we weren't at first. But in Nice, they start on the right. So every time I go in to kiss him, we end up meeting in the middle, just like with the woman in Lyon. I bring it up nearly every time with Cyril. You're not in Nice anymore, adapt, I say. But he doesn't care. He had the last laugh once when he invited me to a party in Paris with all his family and friends from Nice. Every single one of them went to the right for the first kiss when I met them. So I gave up and went right for the night too. But of all the twists and turns of this little dance, the part I find the most interesting is the idea of earning the kiss from another Frenchman. A friend of mine from Toulouse, Arnaud, explained it to me. If, say, we were going to get really drunk tonight and end up swimming in the canal, we'd kiss from that point on. If we went out on a wild bender of a night, we'd kiss afterwards too, he told me. So it's all about alcohol then? No. It's more about going through some kind of adventure or ordeal together. When you both come out on the other side, you just know that it's time to start kissing. It's almost like you've become a brother, he said. What a minefield. My mind was racing, as usual, with the idea of earning the kiss from French friends, of ducking, diving, swimming in canals, going on adventures, having a true French brother at the end of it all. Unfortunately, it never happened with Arnaud. In fact, I rarely see him anymore. Since we chatted about kissing that day by the canal 3 years ago, Arnaud has gotten married and had 2 kids. When I occasionally see him, we simply shake hands. I can't help wondering what adventures we've missed. .6 The Bank. My September birthday was fast approaching and I'd booked this chateau for it. Life was too short not to, I figured. I got a guest list together and told everyone that for €120 each, we could spend the weekend living like kings and queens with food and alcohol included. A few dozen people confirmed they were in. Money was still tight for me, as usual, but I had enough to cover the costs of renting the chateau, provided, of course, that everybody paid me back straight away. Perhaps I didn't stress the urgency of the situation enough, because almost no one transferred their share up front. I found this out when I got a call from the bank to tell me that my balance was dangerously low. So low, in fact, that I had negative money in the bank. I was well beyond a month's rent in the negatives, and the bank wanted to talk about it. Now, I don't know how it works in the country you're in, but where I'm from, when you run out of money, your bank card stops working. Quite simple, really. But nothing is simple in France. In fact, I'd never even considered a negative bank balance to be a possibility. And how did it get so far into the negatives? I mean, I obviously rented a chateau, but I thought I had enough to cover the deposit. I went into the bank to inquire why I owed them so much money. And the woman at the desk explained.
Well, monsieur, you've gone into the negatives on your balance, and you're not allowed to do that.
But why is it so far negative? I asked. I surely hadn't frittered away that much money while I was watching my spending.
Well, every time you've used your card since you went under zero, we've simply charged you 20 euros as a fee.
A 20 euro fee? The banker printed out my statement and proved to me that this was exactly what she'd done. We perused it together.
See? Here, you bought something for 1 euro at a supermarket. We charged you 20 euros for that. That same day, you bought something for 1 euro 30. We charged you another 20 euros.
But I was just buying milk. Why didn't you tell me I was in the negatives? If I'd known that you'd charge me, I wouldn't have used the card to buy milk. Now, let's stop here for a second and be brutally honest. That sentence is tremendously tricky to say if you're still learning French. It's what my French teacher would have called the future conditional tense. If I had known, I wouldn't have. But I'd never learned it properly, so obviously I didn't say it correctly. My mind flashed back to my mocking French teacher and I shuddered. In any case, verb tenses and teachers aside, I wasn't getting anywhere. The French woman didn't care that I was being charged 21 euros and 30 cents for a bottle of milk. She even seemed a tiny bit pleased about it. And it was at this precise moment that I learned the importance of having a strong argument if you want to get your way in France. And unfortunately, I learned this because I absolutely didn't have a strong argument. I had nothing. Just bewilderment. And a growing feeling of despair. I considered getting angry, just like my downstairs neighbor had done with the internet people, but I decided my French still wasn't up to scratch. The banker gave me the "that's how it is" shrug that I was coming to know so well. I considered pleading my case a little, but I figured I'd think it over instead. So I left. That night, I was having a canal-side beer with a Parisian mech called Clovis. No kiss, firm handshake, 2 pumps.
Ça va, mec?
Ça va, Clovis?
Tranquille.
Ça va, mon mec?
Non, plutôt ça va, mec. Parce que si tu me dis ça va, mon mec, et c'est how are you doing, my boyfriend? Et je ne suis pas ton copain. Lena wouldn't be too happy.
See, everyone listening at home, in a previous chapter, Clovis, I mentioned how I used to do that all the time in Paris, and I've just proven that it's not a good idea to say it to a French person.
Exactement.
Okay. Clovis shared his name with the first king of the Franks and had the charm of a TV host. Well, he was a TV host, actually. He was also born in...
I still am.
That's true. He still is. And he is a TV host. Born in Paris, which is quite a rare breed in the French capital where so many locals are actually born elsewhere in the country. I told Clovis my plight, and he wasn't impressed.
No one should have to put up with that kind of nonsense, honestly. Let me pay a visit to your bank manager, okay? I'll sort this out. Just tell me when and where.
The next day, I saw a performance unlike any I've ever seen before or since. Clovis, dressed up in a suit and tie, strode into the bank and took no prisoners. He played the good cop and the bad cop. He switched from,
Bonjour, mademoiselle, comment ça va? Hello, mademoiselle, how are you today?
to,
You know as well as I do that my client can leave your tiny bank for a dozen others. That wouldn't be hassling and with this kind of rubbish. Honnêtement, vous savez très bien que mon ami Oliver est un bon client, il est sérieux, il peut quitter votre banque à n'importe quel moment et clairement ce sera un problème pour vous, alors faites quelque chose honnêtement.
Wow, it's like I'm having a deja vu, Clovis. This is amazing. It was incredible to watch. The banker couldn't keep up with him. Every time she got defensive or upset, he turned the charm back on and she melted like a cheese fondue.
Arrêtez, franchement.
Like a chess grandmaster, he was knocking down her pieces one by one. Bam, there goes another pawn. She backpedaled and then, boom, she lost her bishop, then her knight. It was quite the sight. Eventually, he convinced her that the bank had been unreasonable and that something would have to be done about it or we'd walk. And it worked.
Vous êtes parfaite, mademoiselle. Vous êtes parfaite.
Can you say that? Vous êtes parfaite? You're perfect?
Bah, you can, but you have to say it in the right way because it's kind of flattering and you don't want to be over the top, let's say.
Well, I could learn a lot from you, Clovis. By the time we left, the banker had erased all the fees and made it so my account could sink as far as minus 2,500 euros before I'd incur further charges. Checkmate. I was dumbfounded. The first time around, it was the banker who had won, but this time we beat the bank. Thanks to Clovis, named after the king of the Franks, now more like the king of the banks. Thanks for doing that for me, Clovis. That was a treat to watch, I said. It's amazing that that's what it takes to get things done in this country. Clovis just smiled and gave me a Gallic shrug of his own.
Well, sometimes that's how it works in France. Now, where are we going for lunch? On you, I think.
Lovely, Clovis. That's exactly how I remember it. And if I remember correctly, we did go out for lunch to the Ritz.
Let me correct you. We went for salad in a place in the 19th arrondissement of Paris. Okay, the place was brand new, just opened, because you like these nice new places, but it was salad.
I think that there's a chance that my bank was still negative, so I probably had to. But I'm interested, Clovis, as we chat via Zoom during this lockdown.
Yeah.
Firstly, I'm interested, is that how you remember the bank experience?
Yeah, I remember that day I was at work and I was presenting some show or reporting. Basically, I was wearing a suit and I just thought it would be the right moment to go and join you. And it's always better to be presentable, but to be wearing a nice shirt or suit when you're trying to negotiate something, especially in a bank. And that's basically what we did. And that's the way I remember it. I remember very well the banker behind her desk at the entrance of the bank and talking to her. And and as you described it, being firm, very straightforward, serious, and also very polite and trying to be nice, but trying to make her realize that basically they were being out of order.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point, two interesting points. That episode where you helped me at the bank, we've told that story, or at least I have, among our circle of friends, and it's kind of become famous. That image of you coming in with your suit.
I don't really want to become that guy, that friend that you call when you have to go and see your banker every time. So don't tell it to everyone in our group of friends. Or
I've just published a book with the story.
True.
But the other thing that you brought up that's interesting is dressing well when negotiating in France. Is it? Can you give me tips? Is it important to sort of be charming but a little bit angry, sort of, to get things done in general? Or
well, I think it's like that in every country. You just have to show some assurance, show that you know what you're talking about. And also, I think it's important to know your rights. Basically, we all know that banks have got a lot of money and also they make a lot of money on customers like us. And they tend to be more lenient with people who've got more money. It doesn't mean that if you don't have too much money in their bank, you can't ask them for like some fine reduced or something like that. And it's just about negotiating, about knowing your rights, and about being firm, serious, straightforward, but also nice and polite, obviously.
And when people listening at home think, by golly, this guy Clovis speaks pretty good English. You are half and half. Yeah, half and half. I suspected as much, Clovis.
I'm also 1.95 meters, so very tall, imposing. Unfortunately, rather skinny. So I don't come across as a bouncer, but at least I try to make a good first impression.
Yeah, maybe your height was the real reason that I got you in the bank that day. But thank you, Clovis, for joining me for this audio experience.
No problem. My pleasure, Ollie.
.7 The Chateau. Now, everyone should rent a chateau in the French countryside before they die. When we did it for my 30th birthday, it was every bit as magical, mythical, and mad as it may sound. The guests still talk about it to this day. The expectations were high as we all took Friday off work, rented cars, and headed out to the countryside. Our castle, the Château d'Autricourt, was in Burgundy, a few hours southeast of Paris. I was in a minivan with 4 other people plus supplies for the whole crowd. The van was so full that we drove with food between our legs and wine bottles tucked between the seats. The excitement was almost tangible. As we zipped through the fields of the Champagne region, we got to talking about the chateau itself and its elegant, mysteriously translated website. Lena pulled up the page and read it aloud.
Have you ever dreamt of being a princess or a chatelaine?
What's a chatelaine? I asked Fabian. My walking French-English dictionary.
Châtelain and châtelaine are people who actually live in a castle. Château, châtelain, châtelaine is the same.
Noun, verb, subject, object. Thanks, Fabian. Let's get on with it. I made a mental note of yet another wonderful, untranslatable French word. Fabian, in the back seat, looked like he was imagining life with a châtelaine of his own. Lena continued to read as we passed more vineyards.
Have you ever dreamt of being a princess or a châtelaine, a king or a knight, to let your long blonde hair down a tower or to fight an enemy on a drawbridge, and to go treasure hunting afterwards?
Yes.
All kinds of dreams are waiting to be manifested in this enchanting place. Bursting with enormous potential, it needs your fantasy and your creativity to be rescued from time's clutches.
Oh my god.
Feast in the medieval salle à manger, frolic with picnics in the meadows, take tea in the Indian temple, fish in the moats, savor succulent snail tasting, breakfast on an open tower, ghost hunting. Here, everything's possible.
Whoa.
Wow.
Everyone went quiet in the car, imagining life in the chateau. Lena was scrolling through the pictures with widening eyes. When we finally arrived, we felt as if we'd hit the castle jackpot. The roads had been getting progressively smaller as we ventured further from Paris. And by the time we reached the castle grounds, we were well and truly in the middle of nowhere. We drove through the entrance where huge lime trees flanked the driveway. We passed the ruins of a tower in the fields and continued as the trees thinned and eventually revealed the chateau in all its splendid glory. The exterior was jaw-dropping. We drove across a stone drawbridge over the moat that surrounded the chateau, parked in the courtyard, then tried to take it all in. On one side was a grand Renaissance building with vine-covered limestone walls and grey-slated roofs. The pointed turrets of 5 towers cast shadows over the inner courtyard. To the other side were more sleeping quarters in a separate building with its own towers and turrets. Between the two was a little chapel, in case anyone decided to get married, I suppose. We could see huge fish swimming lazily in the moat while the sun shone strong on the hectares of fields in the distance. With smiles that matched our own, the owners and their dog greeted us for the grand tour. And if we thought the exterior was grand, we were in for a surprise. The châtelaine, or the lady who owned the castle, led us into the huge stone kitchen with vaulted walls and a massive raised fireplace. "Big enough to roast a wild boar," she said with a wink. The kitchen led into a mammoth dining room with several stuffed ostrich heads attached to the wall by the base of their long necks. On both sides of the room were fireplaces with Gothic chimneys. Beyond the dining room was the grand salon, or the dance floor, I thought. Then a games room and a few spare bedrooms. At both ends of the ground floor were staircases leading to long corridors upstairs, which were lined with stuffed wild boar and deer heads. Along the corridors were the doors to the rest of the bedrooms, most of which came complete with 4-poster beds, aristocratic portraits, open fireplaces, and period bathrooms. It was unreal. Many, if not most of the guests got lost at some point over the weekend, which is hardly a surprise considering we lived in such tiny Parisian apartments. Lena and I took the royal suite. It was my birthday after all, and our ensuite bathroom was bigger than our entire home in Paris. The bedroom was big enough to swing a tiger. We even had our own balcony looking over the fields and the moat with its fat and lazy carp swimming below. And the castle walls were about 1 meter thick, perfect for keeping the cold out and for containing the noise from any outrageous parties hosted inside. The guests arrived throughout the day from their various corners of Europe and Australia, and we arranged everyone into groups of 5. Each group was to organize one meal and to clean up after it, and nothing else. The idea was that the serial helpers could take a break and the serial slackers wouldn't be able to get away with any nonsense. And it seemed to work. We'd bought fairly simple ingredients for feasts, fried chicken, big salads, pastas, and it was all washed down with local wine and champagne. Those on breakfast duty were responsible for waking up first, then driving to the village boulangerie to collect our daily order of 15 baguettes, 15 croissants, and 15 pain au chocolat. In the days, we played ball games in the garden, lazed on the chaise longue, and bathed in a nearby pond. In the evenings, we ate like royalty by a long table in the front garden. My friends gave a mix of warm and cruel speeches to mark my birthday, and we watched the sunset over the French countryside. And at night, we partied like French aristocrats. Now, I'm not one to condone any excesses of any kind, but when I say we partied like aristocrats, I'm not exaggerating. The parties were so wild and unruly that most guests don't remember what happened. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, an Australian guest with an interest in amateur photography had positioned a GoPro camera high in a corner of the main dining hall and set it to take a picture every 5 minutes. It captured details of the night that no one would have otherwise believed. Flicking through them the next day almost left more questions than answers. After dinner, there's a shot of the dining room turned dance floor gradually filling up. In the next shot, there's a group of people lingering suspiciously over the champagne, which I assume is the moment someone spiked the proverbial punch, but I don't even dare to guess what. A few more photos later, and another of the Australian guests has captured everyone's attention as she strides into the room in a corset and an enormous white Marie Antoinette wig. Then the corset is gone, and she stands bare-breasted to the shock and delight of the crowd, all while her wig remains perfectly in place. In the next, a cake with sparklers has appeared as more people seem to have removed their clothes. As the pictures continued, the night apparently turned into some kind of wild rave that ended, as far as I can tell, when a half-naked Marie Antoinette herself can be seen approaching the camera on the wall with her hand outstretched. The GoPro was found tucked between the sofa cushions the next morning, forever taking photos of nothing but pillows. Perhaps it was better that way. Nice holiday. It was around this time that things got serious between me and Lena. She'd moved out of her place in Belleville and into my tiny apartment. I'd met her parents several times and I even stayed with them in Sweden. And what better way to enjoy the last of the good weather for the year than to all take a holiday together in Nice on the French Riviera. Nice was as lovely as ever with its stony beachfront, wide promenade, and summery sea views. The pace of life, too, was refreshingly slower than in Paris. But best of all, someone had the brainwave to rent scooters for the weekend. Now when I say scooter, I mean the one with an engine, the kind that lets you whiz along the coastline of the Mediterranean Sea without a care in the world. That's exactly what we did, and it was one of the most exhilarating experiences of my life. A real game changer. I'd never ridden a scooter before, never even considered trying one, but there was such a wonderful, freeing feeling of zipping along the roads with the air in my face, the wind on my body, and the road stretched out in front of me. I loved driving through the city, weaving among the cars, parking wherever I wanted, and then getting back on and doing it all again. We scooted all over the Riviera that weekend, from Monaco to Antibes, and I was a man possessed. Then, one warm evening, I had a life-changing experience. We were all driving back to Nice from Antibes after the sun had set, and a wild thunderstorm took us by surprise. The thunder bellowed, the lightning was frightening, but the rain was nowhere to be seen. We had the Mediterranean Sea to our right, an empty coastal road ahead of us, and I never felt more alive. We raced towards the safety of the hotel, trying to beat the inevitable downpour. The roar of the thunder grew stronger. The sky grew darker. It felt like the universe was speaking to me, shouting at me. I could feel the energy in the air, and my body was tingling with the vibrations from the scooter, the thunder, and the sheer thrill of being in the middle of a storm. I felt like one of those tornado chasers. We were facing danger, the risk of getting caught in the downpour or getting struck by lightning, and we were dashing to escape it. All on the back of a scooter, exposed to the elements and at their mercy. I was yelling with joy. It was ecstasy at 45 kilometers an hour. I felt like a bolt of lightning could have hit me and I wouldn't have even noticed. We made it back to our hotel just before the rain started, and I was a changed man. I had a revelation. I knew exactly what was missing from my life in Paris. Right then and there, I told Lena and her family that I wanted a scooter of my own for Paris. It'd be perfect, I said. But they all looked at me like I was crazy. Lena put her foot down, and quickly.
Are you mad? Do you know how dangerous that would be?
Oh. Her parents joined in.
Nej, Oliver, absolutely nej.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's one thing here out in the countryside, but in Paris, you know, they drive like crazy.
They said that scooting along the empty roads in the Riviera was one thing, but they wouldn't want their daughter to be doing the same in Paris. It was a resounding no, and I was surprised, shocked, disappointed, and maybe even hurt. But they talked me out of it, and I gradually accepted it. When we got back to Paris, even though I'd given up on the idea of getting a scooter, the topic had created a divide between Lena and me. If I even mentioned it, she changed the subject. And what was worse, the divide spread to other parts of our life. She started to act secretively, snatching up her phone when it got a message, leaving the room to answer calls, slipping out of our Paris apartment with only vague details about where she was going. Yes, the relationship was still in its early stages, but something didn't feel right. We'd come to our first big disagreement. But I'd soon learned that there was a wild and surprising explanation for her behavior. Back to present day, Oliver G here. As I mentioned in the last episode, baby Otis was born just over a week ago. I think you heard his hiccups, perhaps, in chapter 2. And that means for me, I'm on a little bit of a paternity leave break. Hope you guys are enjoying this audiobook. I said audiobook. It's an audio experience. Gosh, forgive me for that. Hope you're enjoying this experience. Lots of music, lots of sound effects. That one was a fun one to make, especially with the Chateau chapter there. If you just simply can't wait for next week to find out why Lena's so angry at me at the end of this chapter, you can always buy the book, theeiffeltower.com/memoir. We've got paperbacks left in Paris and the United States. The other thing you can do is you can buy the full audio experience. So if you've got a long car ride ahead, €20, I'll send you the whole thing on one big file so you can listen to it in one go. That's theeiffeltower.com/audio. Or you can do combinations of them. In fact, I recommend you go to theeiffeltower.com/shop and it's all there. I'll leave you on this note. Eddie, my brother, who has been remastering these audio experience chapters, making them sound better than ever before, he's also been making scrolls to go with them. So I've already released it. They came out at the same time. The scroll is like a guide to this chapter. So all the things you've heard, Eddie's tracked them down and gone deeper. So for example, there's like dozens of pictures of the chateau that we stayed at, pictures from Brittany. There's links to things to read, like best movies based in Brittany, information on the secret basketball court I played on in the Marais. The idea is to give you a deep dive into my story, like a deeper dive behind the scenes, very visual too, but also a deeper dive into Paris and France at the same time. To unlock all that, simply become a member on patreon.com/theeiffeltower. If you're sitting there thinking, I don't really get all this Patreon stuff, just wait. In the upcoming chapters, I'll explain. It's how I turned this concept of the Eiffel Tower into a career. But now I'm getting ahead of myself. You will hear from me again next week for Chapter 4. Thanks so much for listening.